Hello, everyone. It's Diane, the massage mentor, and I'm here live with Ben Benjamin. I think Ben is probably one of the icons of the massage industry and the massage world. Ben, you've been practicing massage since 1963. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in body work and what it was like in 1963, hitting the frontier of our industry?
Well, about 5 or 6 years before that, I was in high school and I was in the High School of Performing Arts and I was studying to be a dancer. And one day I jumped up in the air, I came down and my life changed and my back was hurting me. And then through some teachers, I got to this man named Dr. Kagan. He wasn't actually a doctor, but everybody called him Dr. Kagan because he helped people more than doctors. And so I went to see him and he kind of adopted me. And I worked with him for many, many years. I had almost every injury and he helped me through my life, my body, my questions. He was kind of my alternate father. And so that's kind of how I got started. I was treated for lots of different things and he was a wonderful person. And then I was in Montreal for a year or so, and I started a practice after working sort of with Kagan as a client, and also he would teach me things. And so I began to work. I was dancing in a ballet company in Montreal called Grand Ballet Canadien, and I had a little office, and one of the headmasters or directors of the ballet theater was the director up there in Canada, and he knew Kagan, and he came to see me, sent everybody to see me, and I started my practice for like $5 an hour or something like that. And it was like a long time ago. And then I returned to New York, and through his connection, I got a job working for a ballet theater at Lincoln Center. And I had an office at Lincoln Center. It was more like a closet, but that's what got me started. And so I have been in practice ever since that time. And then I went to actually work for Dr. Kagan for a number of years and like worked with him, loved him, and he would coach me and train me more and more. And so that's really how I got my start, was really through my own body and healing my own body.
I love that. And I think that that's probably, would you agree that that's probably one of the strongest bases that you could have as a practitioner is first understanding your own body and your own pain and then helping others. I think that that's a great base.
But it gives you a lot of compassion for other people when they're hurting. And I've always been interested in, when people had a problem in their body when they hurt. And I spent many years kind of wandering in the dark in the massage world where not too many people knew anything really about injuries. Um, and then I came upon a man named Dr. James Syriacs, and that really changed my life again. And this was in 1982 or so, 1980. And I went to his course, and he wrote a book called The Textbook of Orthopedic Medicine, and was the first doctor to really organize how to look at injuries in the body. Before that, doctors didn't really do it very systematically, and most doctors who worked with pain were surgeons. And he coined the phrase orthopedic medicine, meaning everything that happens in your body that hurts, that's not an orthopedic condition or some, internal organ problem. So I studied with him, and that changed my life the second time.
And that I think one of the things too that newer massage therapists don't realize is probably too, when I'm getting off track, but I'm just excited because it's not often I get to talk to someone who's been doing massage and body work since 1963. So I mean, it was a much different time in those days, and I don't think we had as many categories on massage, and we certainly didn't have as much literature on massage, and so it was really, you were really one of the four, at the forefront of building our community. Can you take that, or would you agree with that?
Well, I was on my own for a long time. And then I encountered the AMTA, and they had about, several thousand members. They were very small, and joined that organization and something called the Council of Schools, where representatives from the major massage schools in the country would gather. And we did a lot of important things. We set a lot of ethical standards and, improved education. We did a lot of really good things in those days.
And could we jump into I have a couple questions on ethics. And I looked at your website, and it kind of started with some of the ethics around, sexual boundaries, and I'm guessing because in that time we didn't really have a code of ethics, that you were a big part of helping gather that information. Can you just tell me a little bit about that journey and how it looked then and how it looks today?
Well, there wasn't, I was always very interested in communication and boundaries and things like that. And in my school, we had over 100 hours or 150 hours at one point.
That is awesome.
Communication, ethics, sexuality, and most places had a few hours, and it was nothing like that. And one day in Boston, there was an article in the Boston Globe about a psychiatrist who had sexually abused his clients who were dying, and thought it was good for them, that they had sex with him. So I began to ask in the community. I was training about 35 people from all over the country at that weekend when that happened. And I asked them if they had known personally of some sexual abuse issue that happened in the massage community. And 17 of them raised their hand. That was half. So I was, I got very interested in, looking at that. And so I looked around for courses on boundaries and ethics. Didn't really see much. So I created one and started teaching it around the country, and got very involved with, setting the ethical standards in Massachusetts, and upgrading the code of ethics to be much more specific about sexual things, and dual relationships and all kinds of stuff. And I pushed that. And I feel like what's important about ethics is what do you do when nobody's watching you? What do you do? How do you do the right thing just because this is the right thing, not because somebody's looking over your shoulder? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't do the right thing. I'd say that most do, but there's some few people who give the profession a pretty bad name when they do inappropriate things. There have been a lot of sexual assaults, and particularly in spas situations where they hire people without a lot of scrutiny, without a lot of not looking at them carefully, not interviewing them well, not training them, not supervising them. And people get a little crazy and they do irrational things, particularly men with women. That's what happens most often. Happens, men to men and women to men probably too, but not very often. I testify as an expert witness for the past 12 or 13 years or so. And so the cases involve usually, people who have been abused sexually. Sometimes they injure them, but it's usually a trauma that takes the person years or maybe never to recover from. And that's very sad.
It is very sad. So thank you very much for your work there. And when it comes to boundaries I think a lot of therapists think it's like, hey, what's up? And people don't get too personal, I think, with clients sometimes, because we are in such an intimate setting. What is some advice you would give us there?
Well, just because you're touching somebody doesn't mean, the intimacy. The intimacy is kind of physical on a body level, but not a sexual level and not a personal level. So people, or emotional level, people kind of get confused. Clients get confused and they think that they're close to you. And some therapists who are not very developed. When I had a school for about 30 years. When in my school, we spent a lot of time training people about boundaries, about transference, countertransference, all those sorts of things. And most therapists don't really understand those things, or they're not trained in those things, and they don't understand that they create an unhealthy relationship sometimes with their clients. Some clients hug their clients, before and after treatments. They get very close very quickly, and that's usually inappropriate. You've been seeing somebody for 20 years or 10 years or whatever. an occasional thing happens where they want to hug you, but not you ever initiating it. People don't get that in certain quarters. And lately, the standards in schools have gone down because a lot of corporations have bought up schools and they've fired the experienced teachers because they're too expensive. And they hire people right out of school who really are frankly not very good teachers or don't have the experience. For people to want to be in the profession. So there are maybe 1/3 at least, or maybe more, less students in massage schools than there were along maybe 10, 15 years ago. And that's a sad thing too, because the schools have downgraded their standards. A lot of them, not all of them, but schools that are people that own like 20 schools and they don't really know the profession, they're invested in it. It's not like a mom and pop thing. The quality was much higher in those days.
I agree 100%. And you said something just that I sometimes when I just like to bring things to the surface more and more as experience. I mean, it really is important to teach and learn by experience, not necessarily by hypothesis. So it sounds like, a lot of these ethics were built on experience and should be taught with someone who has a little bit of experience in dealing with these things. And I love that you're, really getting boundaries out there, because I think it's something that's really important, especially with new therapists, to learn that stuff early on. So hearing that your school, there was 100 hours of ethics, I think is super important. So if anyone out there with the school is listening, or any teachers, it's super important. And I would say after all this time, you built the practice from 1963, which to me is amazing. And thank you so much for your time and your hard work, because I wouldn't be sitting here without it. Now that you're teaching, what are some of your favorite parts of teaching? And could you share a couple of your greatest moments as a teacher?
So let me correct one thing you said. We didn't have 100 hours of ethics. We had 100 hours of ethics and communication, sexuality, all together. It wasn't just ethics. Because if you are not a good communicator, it's not very good. You can't really set boundaries. It's an integral part of what's going on. So repeat your question again.
You've been teaching for a while. What's your favorite part of teaching, and what are some of your greatest moments as a teacher?
Well, I like really creating new trainings and new courses. That's what I like to do, and see if they're going to work and try them out. I like to teach people how to think critically, how to figure things out, how to think on their feet, especially about when people's bodies are in pain. And so my approach to training people is you got to look at the whole person. You just don't look at, the injured part or whatever. They may be taking medication because they're depressed. They may be eating at McDonald's. They may be, waking up and having, chocolate bars. That's going to destroy their body. People don't understand that nutrition is an incredibly important part of their health, as exercise is, as addressing pain and injuries when they happen, not 2 years later, and to have balance in their life between their work and their life, not just be a worker, but to have relationships with people that you love. That's all very important, to have a balanced life. And that's not something people think about, but in our school, we talked about those kinds of things. And my school was really a training in how to be a better human being. It wasn't really a training in how to be a therapist to work with the body, but to be a good human being, a better human being, to be a role model. You can't be eating crap, never taking vacations, working yourself to the bone, not charging enough money, and be a role model to anybody. You got to take care of yourself. You got to eat well, take vacations, rest, have relationships, not be a workaholic. So, you have to be a model if you're going to teach people anything. People do what you do, they don't do what you say. So that's kind of my philosophy that I teach.
I love that so much I can't even tell you, and it's a big part of my life and my regiment. So I just want to backtrack on one question because you pointed out too, like, could you just give a couple of examples on what you feel that it's important to add to communication with clients? Like, you said ethics and communication. What are a couple simple things that we could walk away with on communication?
Well, first thing is to know yourself, is to have skills in communication. How do you deal with conflict? When you disagree with somebody, do you withdraw and go away, or do you deal with it and talk about it? Do you rage at the person? Are you aware when you're sad? Are you aware when you're mad? How do you handle yourself? Um, that's a very important part of being a good communicator, is knowing yourself first. And then people mostly need training. Most people are not very good communicators naturally. They need to be trained by somebody. I wrote a whole book called Conversation Transformation, which is a little bit like my book, Listen to Your Pain, because in Listen to Your Pain, you're trying to figure out what's wrong with the body, what to do, how to do it right. And in communication, you're trying to figure out what's not right about my communication. How am I falling down and hurting other people or myself by not communicating well? And so it gives you we have a test actually on our website, Conversation Transformation. And we ask people to take that test before they read the book and then after. And it keeps a record of you to see how your communication has improved.
Make sure you guys check that out. And you've written several books, and I just want to touch on that. And you just did a little bit. Do you have a favorite? And do you want to tell us anything about the books you've written
Well,
and the articles? You've written a lot of stuff.
I've written hundreds of articles. I can't
Yeah.
tell you the favorite one, but I'm trying to make my work more available, and I do that in different ways. I do it by training in person. I do it by webinars. I have like 70 or 80 webinars out there, and I produced another 70. I'm starting a subscription service so that people can have access to all that information very inexpensively, like 24/7. And I'm coming up with an app actually that you put on your phone with over 500 flashcards with beautiful drawings and photographs and actually fun cartoons to have people learn about the body, about injuries, about all sorts of things. So I'm trying to get the information out there in a ways that people can receive it, and in a ways that are not too expensive. I have very expensive, I have less expensive, I have even less expensive, and then the app is going to be $10 for something that's going to take you months, and you'll compete against everybody in the world, and you can put any name there you want, but you'll be seeing and there are 34 levels to understanding this app. There'll be the questions will be all in order, so they're kind of easy the first time, but then if you press a button, like there'll be 70 questions on the shoulder, and you press a button and it
Oh, wow.
randomizes them, and then they're much more difficult. And so you can press the whole body random, and it'll be very challenging to answer all these questions. But it's a learning app and a fun app. So
Well, that's awesome.
we'll get into that and do that.
Oh, that's great. And then, I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I just want to ask: is there anything that you want to kind of leave us with? Any thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, just important to do what you love. Don't do something you have to. Do what you love, whatever that is. And if you're a therapist who's been doing it for a while, and sometimes you have wonderings, like you get attracted to a client, or you have a client you don't like, you want to get rid of, or whatever. Good to have a supervisor, to have somebody who's a psychologist, a social worker, a counselor, who's experienced in supervision. It's a very traditional thing to do in psychology and psychiatry, that you have a supervisor, but not in massage. In my school, we had like 10 supervisors, and sometimes the students would hire them even after graduation, and they would meet in small groups to deal with the things that come up. And one of the reasons that businesses of massage and spas get into trouble is that they don't supervise people. I mean, emotional supervision, not a supervisor that makes sure you're there on time, but somebody to talk to you about what happens when somebody asks you out and you don't know how to say no without insulting them, or letting them know you don't do that, or you have the urge to see the person outside or borrow money or whatever it is. You need somebody to talk to who's a mentor, and a supervisor is a good person to hire once a month or so to deal with those kinds of things that are not easy to figure out yourself.
They're not. I think a lot of people beat themselves up because they can't figure a lot of those things out themselves. And I didn't figure it. I don't know about, I mean, just from what you're saying, you didn't figure everything out on your own.
No, I
We
had
all,
supervisors for years. I had a supervisor for 20 years, a phenomenal person who did all the training for the Gestalt Institute. She was unbelievable. Yeah,
so it's okay to ask for help too, I think is
absolutely.
it's a
Smart
good thing.
people ask for help. Okay.
Well, Ben, I can't even tell you. It's like I said, it's such an honor to have you with us today and covering a little bit about ethics. And one more time, do you have anything else? I'm going to put up all your information. I'll get your information after we close with the group on the app, and I'll post all the information about Ben that I could possibly post for you guys to check him out, check out his pages, check out his app, check out his webinars. I don't think you could go wrong with this man because he's been around a really long time, and I love what you said today. And thank you again so much for your time.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.